Okay, let's get into it. We're focusing today on a really significant cognitive challenge for our older patients, particularly when they come into the emergency department.
Absolutely. It's one of those high-stakes issues. We know it accelerates functional decline, leads to higher mortality, really critical stuff.
High stays indeed, and it impacts more than just the patient, right? Higher institutionalization rates, big system burden. Okay, let's start with the scale. How big a problem is this right now in the ED?
Well, for patients aged 65 years and older, delirium affects somewhere between 7% and 10% of all their ED visits.
7 to 10%, that's already a substantial number.
It is. And it's only heading upwards.
And the future projections, I understand, are even more concerning.
They really are. That rate, that 7 to 10%, it's estimated it could nearly triple. Yeah. By 2030, the estimate is that delirium might complicate up to 25%. A quarter of all ED visits for that age group.
25%, that's staggering. Which leads to the next big question, are we actually identifying it consistently now?
Unfortunately, no. This is the really sobering statistic. Currently, emergency physicians overlook delirium as the cause of altered mental status in, get this, 75% cases.
75%, 3 out of 4.
3 out of 4 are missed or misdiagnosed initially. It's a huge detection gap.
Wow. That really highlights why we need to get the basics right. So when we talk about delirium, what's the core concept? It's about decompensation, isn't it?
That's exactly right. The formal definition is essentially a decompensation of cerebral function. Think of it like an acute brain failure, triggered by some precipitating stressor, like an infection, for instance.
So it's not just confusion, it's the brain failing acutely.
Correct. And it's distinct from their underlying dementia or any prior cognitive issues they might have had.
And the classic description involves reversibility.
Yes, that's key. It's typically described as reversible once that underlying medical trigger resolves. That's a major difference compared to, say, dementia.
Okay, so for diagnosis, what are the absolute must-have clinical criteria we need to look for?
You need 2 core things: changes from the patient's baseline. First, and this is crucial, a disturbance in attention.
Meaning
A reduced ability to focus, shift attention, or even just stay oriented. That's the bedrock. Second, you need an additional disturbance in cognition.
like what specifically?
Well, that could be a perception issue, maybe hallucinations, or perhaps a significant memory deficit, problems with language, that sort of thing.
Got it. Attention disturbance plus another cognitive issue and the timeline. How quickly does this happen?
It has to be rapid. We're talking onset over hours to, at most, days.
Hours to days, okay.
And, importantly, it needs to fluctuate. The symptoms, their severity, have to wax and wane throughout the day. Maybe worse in the evening, maybe moments of clarity, then confusion again.
That fluctuation is key evidence, isn't it? Shows it's an acute process.
Exactly. It signals this isn't their baseline. It's something active, likely toxic or metabolic, affecting the brain right now.
And if we only see the patient briefly, we could miss that fluctuation entirely.
Precisely, which is why getting collateral history from family or caregivers is so important.
Okay, so we know it's this acute brain failure. What's the underlying cause? Is it one thing?
No, definitely not one single mechanism. It's always the result of an underlying medical condition, or sometimes multiple conditions. The exact pathophysiology isn't fully mapped out, but it seems to be multifactorial. Think widespread neurochemical disruption from that systemic stress.
Right, makes sense. Okay, let's pivot to risk. Who should immediately raise a red flag for delirium? Who are the high-risk patients?
Well, age is number 1. Anyone 65 or older is inherently higher risk.
65 plus, okay.
We also see increased risk in males and patients with significant existing health problems, especially things like kidney disease or liver disease.
Comorbidities matter.
Hugely. Also, patients who already have some form of dementia are much more vulnerable to developing delirium on top of it.
And you mentioned medications before.
Yes, absolutely. Polypharmacy. Patients taking multiple medications, often defined as 5 or more concurrently. That's a major risk factor.
So,
Interactions, side effects, they can easily tip someone over the edge.
okay, so age, male sex, comorbidities, dementia, polypharmacy. Got it. Now, understanding the presentation is key to closing that 75% detection gap. How do we categorize the different ways delirium can look?
Clinically, we talk about psychomotor subtypes. There were 3 main ones: hypoactive, hyperactive, and mixed.
All right, break those down for us. What did they look like in the ED?
Okay, so hyperactive is probably what most people picture. That's the agitated patient, maybe restless, hypervigilant, pulling at lines, sometimes having hallucinations or delusions. They might have tachycardia. They're noticeable.
Right, they're often disruptive, hard to manage, probably get attention quickly.
Exactly. They can be a safety risk. But then there's the hypoactive subtype. This is the polar opposite.
How so?
The patient is drowsy, lethargic, maybe seems withdrawn or even depressed. They're quiet. They might cooperate with exams, but are clearly not themselves mentally.
And these are the ones easily missed, seen as just tired or sleepy?
Precisely. They don't cause trouble, so they often fly under the radar. They're seen as just being old or sundowning.
And the third type?
Is mixed, which, as the name suggests, includes features of both. They might fluctuate between being agitated and restless, and then periods of being very lethargic and quiet.
So hyperactive, hypoactive, mixed. Which ones do we actually see most often in the ED?
This is really important. The hypoactive and mixed subtypes are actually the most common. They make up potentially up to 96% of delirium cases seen in the ED population.
96% are hypoactive or mixed. That explains the misdiagnosis rate.
It really does. We're geared to react to the hyperactive patient, but the vast majority are the quiet, withdrawn ones. That hypoactive patient needs just as urgent attention.
That really underscores the need for active screening, not just waiting for obvious agitation. Now, since dementia is such a huge risk factor, how do we reliably tell the difference? Is this acute delirium or just their baseline dementia?
Yeah, differentiating is critical because the management and prognosis are totally different. The main distinction is reversibility.
Right, you mentioned that delirium is usually reversible.
If you find and fix the underlying cause, dementia, by its nature, involves permanent cognitive impairment. It's not going away.
And the speed of onset helps too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's probably the second biggest clue. Delirium hits fast hours to days. Family can often say, yesterday he was fine, today he's like this. Dementia develops slowly over months or years.
Okay, reversibility and speed of onset. What about their actual level of consciousness?
Another key difference. In delirium, attention is impaired. It fluctuates, and their overall level of consciousness is often altered, even if subtly clouded. With dementia, while memory might be poor, attention is usually intact, and their level of consciousness is typically normal until the very late stages.
That makes sense. Is there any condition that really muddies the waters here, an exception that looks like delirium but might be dementia?
Yes, there's one big one, Lewy body dementia. It's notoriously tricky
Why is that?
because it often presents with quite rapid onset, significant fluctuations in consciousness and attention, or sometimes visual hallucinations features that scream delirium. Plus, patients often have Parkinsonian motor symptoms like rigidity or tremor. It can be very hard to distinguish initially.
So if you have what looks like delirium but it's just not getting better with treatment, Lewy body dementia might be something to consider.
Exactly. Keep it on the differential, especially in persistent cases.
Okay, so once we suspect delirium, what's the standard tool we should be using for screening?
The most widely used and validated one is the Confusion Assessment Method, or CAM. It's designed to quickly assess those core features: acute onset, inattention, disorganized thinking, or altered consciousness.
With a CAM. And what if the patient is too unwell or unable to participate? Nonverbal, maybe?
Then getting a detailed history from family members or caregivers becomes absolutely essential. You need to know, is this a change from their baseline? How fast did it happen? Does their mental state fluctuate? That collateral information is vital.
Right. Before we jump into the workup for causes, are there other serious conditions we need to actively rule out that can mimic delirium?
Definitely. You need a broad differential. Think about primary psychiatric conditions, although acute onset makes delirium more likely. Consider acute intoxication or, importantly, withdrawal states. Alcohol withdrawal is a big one, but also benzodiazepines or opioids.
And neurologic causes.
Yes. Things like non-convulsive status, epilepticus seizures without the shaking, or a postictal state after a seizure. And don't forget, nutritional deficiencies like Wernicke encephalopathy, especially in malnourished patients, or those with alcohol use disorder.
Okay, broad differential. What are the usual suspects? The common precipitating factors. It's a long list, I know.
It is long, which tells you how sensitive the brain is to systemic problems. Number one is probably infection, urinary tract infections, pneumonia, skin infections, even central nervous system infections like meningitis or encephalitis.
Infection first. What else?
Inflammation. Think post-operative states, major trauma, burns, any significant inflammatory process. Then metabolic issues are huge.
Like electrolyte problems.
Exactly. Sodium, calcium imbalances. Also, kidney failure leading to uremia, liver failure causing high ammonia levels, thyroid problems, uncontrolled diabetes.
Okay, infection, inflammation, metabolic. What about major organ systems?
Critical to check. Think stroke or an intracranial bleed. Acute coronary syndrome, a heart attack, can present as delirium. heart failure exacerbations, respiratory failure causing low oxygen, hypoxemia, or high carbon dioxide hypercarbia.
Wow. Almost anything systemic can trigger it.
Pretty much. Even things we might overlook, like severe uncontrolled pain or significant sleep deprivation, especially in the hospital setting.
And then there are the things we sometimes introduce, iatrogenic factors.
Yes, unfortunately. Physical restraints are a known contributor. They often worsen agitation and prolong delirium. Indwelling urinary catheters are another risk factor, increasing infection risk and discomfort.
And medications again?
Medications are arguably the biggest iatrogenic cause, especially psychoactive drugs. Anticholinergics are notorious offenders. Benzodiazepines, narcotics or opioids, even some sleep aids. A new medication or dose change is a very common trigger in older adults.
So the evaluation needs to be broad, aiming to uncover that specific trigger, or maybe multiple triggers. What's the essential initial workup once you've diagnosed delirium?
It needs to be comprehensive because the causes are so varied. Start with a full infectious workup. Definitely urinalysis, a complete blood count looking for white cell count changes in a chest x-ray.
Infection covered. Then metabolic.
Yes, a thorough metabolic panel. Check electrolytes, including calcium, liver function tests, ammonia level if liver disease is suspected, BUN and creatinine for kidney function, and a thyroid-stimulating hormone level. Blood glucose, too, of course.
Okay, labs covered. What about imaging or cardiac?
You absolutely need an electrocardiogram to look for cardiac causes like ischemia or arrhythmias. And usually a computed tomographic scan of the head CT is necessary to rule out acute structural problems like a stroke or a bleed, especially if there are focal neurologic signs or trauma.
Right, it's a top-to-bottom evaluation. Okay, let's talk management. This is crucial. What's the absolute first-line approach for all patients with delirium, whether we're preventing it or treating it?
The cornerstone always is non-pharmacologic strategies.
Yeah.
These are the environmental and behavioral interventions that support the brain.
Often overlooked but foundational.
Absolutely. They should be automatic.
So what does that actually involve? Give us some examples.
It involves things like frequent reorientation, staff introducing themselves, reminding the patient where they are, the time of day, keeping the room quiet and well lit during the day, dim at night to promote normal sleep-wake cycles.
Maintaining that circadian rhythm.
Exactly. Using simple language, making frequent eye contact, and critically, addressing sensory deficits. If the patient wears glasses or hearing aids, make sure they have them and they're working. Those sensory inputs are vital for orientation.
Simple things, but they make a huge difference. Now, agitation is a common problem, especially with hyperactive delirium. Safety concerns often lead to reaching for restraints. What's the guidance on that?
The guidance is clear. Avoid physical restraints whenever possible.
Avoid them. Why?
Because they are known to actually worsen and prolong delirium. They increase agitation, fear, risk of injury, and pressure sores. They often create a negative feedback loop. Restraints are really a failure of non-pharmacologic management.
So they should be a last resort, if ever. When do we consider using medications, pharmacotherapy?
Only when it's absolutely necessary for immediate safety if the patient is a danger to themselves or staff due to severe agitation, violence. Or if those intensive non-pharmacologic strategies have genuinely failed to manage severe, distressing symptoms like hallucinations.
And even then, the goal isn't sedation, right?
No, the goal is symptom control to allow the underlying cause to be treated and the non-pharmacologic measures to work.
No.
And treating the underlying cause remains the primary treatment for delirium itself.
Okay, so if we must use medication for severe agitation, what's the preferred class of drugs?
Antipsychotics are generally preferred over other options like benzodiazepines.
Which ones specifically?
Agents like haloperidol, which is a typical antipsychotic, or atypical agents like risperidone or olanzapine are commonly used. The evidence suggests they're probably similarly effective for short-term control of agitation symptoms. Usually low doses are recommended to start.
But these aren't benign drugs, especially in older patients, right? What are the risks we need to be aware of?
That's a critical point. All antipsychotics, both the older typicals and the newer atypicals, carry a significant warning. They're associated with an increased risk of stroke and mortality in older patients who have underlying dementia.
Increased stroke risk. That's serious.
It is. So using them requires very careful consideration of the risks versus the benefits. It's not a decision to be taken lightly, and it should involve the whole care team if possible. Use the lowest effective dose for the shortest possible time.
Okay, antipsychotics preferred, but with major caution. What about benzodiazepines? Drugs like lorazepam are often used for agitation. Are they recommended for delirium?
Generally, no. Benzodiazepines are not recommended for managing delirium symptoms
Why not?
because they can often make things worse. They can exacerbate the confusion, lead to paradoxical agitation in some older adults, and frequently cause significant oversedation and respiratory depression. They can prolong the delirium.
So benzos can worsen the very thing we're trying to treat. Is there any situation where they are the right choice for delirium?
Yes, there's one major exception. Suspected alcohol withdrawal, or sometimes benzodiazepine withdrawal itself. In those specific cases, benzodiazepines are the first-line treatment and are essential. But for delirium from other causes, avoid them. Stick with antipsychotics as the last resort pharmacologic option.
Okay, that's a really important distinction. Alcohol withdrawal needs benzos. Other delirium generally doesn't.
Correct.
All right, we've covered a lot here. The high prevalence, those key risk factors like age and polypharmacy, how to tell delirium apart from dementia based on onset, fluctuation, and reversibility.
And we've emphasized that management really starts with finding that underlying medical cause and focusing heavily on those non-pharmacologic supportive strategies. Medications are only for safety when absolutely necessary, with antipsychotics preferred over benzodiazepines, but used cautiously.
And really recognizing that the quiet, hypoactive patient is common and needs just as much attention.
Absolutely. That's where the biggest gap often lies.
So, thinking about improving care, what's the takeaway for healthcare providers listening? What should they be considering in their own practice or facility?
Well, here's a final thought to consider. We know that emergency physicians currently miss delirium as the underlying cause in about 3 out of every 4 cases. So the question is, how can systemic changes as scabbers, things like maybe mandatory nursing-led CAM screening for all patients over 65 on arrival, how can those process modifications ensure that early identification and intervention become routine, standard practice where you work?